As Ken Michaels likes to say, hello, hello, everyone. This is Things We Said Today. It's a Beatle podcast about the Beatles. Anything and everything having to do with the Beatles, both together and apart. We get together, we try to do it every other week and discuss different issues, different matters, topics having to do with the Beatles and the world surrounding the Beatles. My name is Darren DeVivo. I'm from WFUV Radio in New York City, 90.7 FM and WFUV.org. I've been at WFUV broadcasting now for over 40 years. Presently can be heard late nights, Monday through Thursdays, and Saturday afternoons on WFUV. And through the years, and not so much recently, but through the years, I've done many interviews and, especially those that have touched the Beatle world. And it gives me great pleasure to hang out with you and with my two friends here on Things We Said Today every other week. Ken Michaels, you know Ken, who is coincidentally enough been in broadcasting just a touch longer than I've been, but the magic 40 is a number you hear thrown around a lot. Ken presently hosts Every Little Thing, his syndicated radio show. Also has a YouTube channel, Ken Michaels Radio, packed with interviews with, again, often crossing into Beatle world, but not necessarily, and not just Beatle guests and topics on Ken Michaels Radio. Um, and Ken also co-hosts, besides this podcast, Talk More Talk with me and Kit O2. I don't think I'm leaving anything out. So
That's it, really.
so let me welcome Ken Michaels. How are you, Ken?
I'm doing great, Darren. We're both 40 plus years in
40
radio.
plus years, yeah. Ken got his start way back when, about maybe I think a year and change before I did. In fact, that's when we met. We often talk about having met each other the very first time, I believe
At WZFM in Westchester.
it was Christmas, the morning of Christmas Eve, 1984 or three. Could have been four. I
Oh,
forget now.
past
Four
it.
would have been four.
Yeah.
1984. More you were doing overnights, and it was the December 24th. And I don't and a mutual friend who I worked with at WFUV, we were just starting out. Said, "Hey, we got to go hang out with my friend Ken Michaels." And it was the second radio station I'd ever been in. And anyway, um, so howdy, Ken. And Allan Kozinn, who is the author of the two books, co-author, I should say, my apologies, the McCartney Legacy, Volume 1 and Volume 2, which are behind Allan to his right. The Blue Book is the latest one. That is the second volume, covering Paul McCartney's years with Wings from 74 to 80. And Volume 1, the Red Book, covering 69 to 73. Allan's been actually also a little over 40 years in journalism as a writer, author, critic, New York Times, for many years, classical editor, has written other books on the Beatles, but right now the focus is on the multi-volume McCartney legacy. Hopefully, one of these months we'll be talking about the emergence of Volume 3. Allan Kozinn, it's always a pleasure to hang out with you. How are you, Allan?
Great, Darren, and good to be here. Hello, Ken. Hello, everyone out there.
And so for this week's show, our topic is basically fueled by the fact that as we move towards the fall, both Paul and Ringo are on tour. The second leg of the 2025 tour for Ringo Starr and his all-star band is coming, and Paul's doing some dates in North America. Does he go into Canada? I forgot already.
3 shows.
3 shows. So a short North American tour. I don't know how many different legs of the Got Back tour this is, but Paul's on the road later in the year. So we're going to talk about our favorite concert memories by any of the Beatles. Who knows? Maybe in another lifetime, I was at Shea Stadium, or maybe not. But first, we have news with Ken Michaels.
All right, thank you, Darren. The biggest news of the week concerns Ringo Starr, who gave one of his video updates online and announced he is again working on a new album,
Ah,
and with T-Bone Burnett.
yes.
So he'll continue to work with T-Bone after the critical success of his last album, Look Up. No other details were given. How far
Great.
along he is on this new album or when it will come out. He also reminded us, as Darren just did, that he'll be back on the road for a few weeks, running from September 10th through the 27th. Ringo stays as busy as ever, which goes to prove that it is true. Like he said, you can't fight lightning. Mm. Whatever you do. Just a week ago, Ozzy Osbourne passed away at the age of 76. I think that Ozzy is important to bring up because it proves that no matter how artists can be stereotyped for the genre of music that they're associated with, in this case heavy metal with Ozzy, you can still be a major Beatle fan. And Ozzy was a bona fide Beatles fan. He once listed 10 of his favorite Beatles songs from She Loves You to The Long and Winding Road. I'm not going to read you everything he said about these 10 songs, but I will read the first song he brought up, She Loves You. This is what he wrote. This is the one that sucked me in. I was a 14-year-old kid with this blue transistor radio. I heard She Loves You, and it floored me. It was as if you knew all the colors in the world. Um, Then someone shows you a brand new color and you go, effing hell, man. He met Paul McCartney when Paul was being interviewed by Howard Stern. Despite his stature as one of the giants in his field, Ozzy acted like sort of a crazed fan around Paul. Through Mark Hudson, Ozzy appeared on Ringo's Vertical Man album, singing backing vocals on the title track. Thanks to Ricardo Miguel, one of our listeners, he informed me that in 2005, Ozzy released an album of all cover versions of rock songs called Undercover. And he covered In My Life, John Lennon's song Woman, and Working Class Hero. And actually, I just saw online Bruce Sugar, who's co-produced with Ringo. So much material. He worked on that album.
Mhm.
Ozzy. In 2010, Ozzy covered John Lennon's song How, which he released as a digital single on iTunes, with proceeds going to benefit Amnesty International. This was a pretty good version of the song, and fans should be impressed by the video. Really nice one that Ozzy made of that song. He's seen walking through the streets of New York carrying a bouquet of flowers, and then towards the end of the video, he's walking in front of the Dakota, and it ends with him at Strawberry Fields laying the bouquet down on the Imagine mosaic. It's really beautiful video.
Mhm.
Ozzy died on July 22nd, just weeks after Ozzy gave his final performance with Black Sabbath in Birmingham, England. He recorded How and released it for what would have been John's 70th birthday. Of course, very sad news about Ozzy's passing. Paul McCartney added one new date so far for the latest leg of his Got Back tour. It's for October 25th in San Antonio, Texas. Tickets will go on sale for that show to the general public this Friday, August 1st. Okay, getting a lot of attention is a comment that Billy Joel made about the Beatles' White Album. This is on Bill Maher's podcast show called Club Random. Billy is giving interviews to promote the new documentary on his life called And So It Goes. And in the interview, Bill Maher and Billy, he asked Billy what his favorite double albums are. And when Bill Maher brought up the White Album, Billy Joel said it wasn't one of his favorites. He's quoted as saying, I hear it as a collection of half-assed songs they didn't finish writing because they were too stoned or they didn't care anymore. I think they had fragments and they put them on the album. Billy said that John was disassociating at that point and that Paul was carrying the weight. I have a feeling Allan has would like to respond to this, and Darren too. Um, we have to respect different opinions, and let's face it, Billy Joel is one of the most successful artists of all time. Alan,
Well, you two are Billy Joel fans. I never have been a Billy Joel fan, so what Billy Joel has to say about anything, either in comments or in music, has never really meant a damn to me. So I'll leave it to you.
thanks so much.
And I would say I'm a Billy Joel fan. I'm not like a fanatic. I much prefer his music. For my money, the last album that really impacted me or interested me was 52nd Street and his live record, songs in the attic or songs from the attic, because those leaned lot was a live album that leaned on early material. But I was never much of a fan of like his
Glass
attempt at,
houses.
glass houses and um the doo-wop album, the oldies
Innocent
album,
man. An innocent
Innocent Man. Yeah, and We Didn't Start the Fire and stuff like that. There was some nice songs on Stormfront, but um I think it's a little, I don't know. I've never heard him bash the Beatles before.
man.
And now he's bashing the Beatles, why, to get a headline at the same time that his documentary's out? To call more attention to his documentary. I also, again, I like Billy Joel. When's the last time, other than the song you put out about a year and a half ago? What have you done lately?
Hmm. We
So,
turn this into a Billy Joel show if
so
you want to, but
Billy.
a lot's been said about the fact that he hasn't made an album, a full album since Street of Dreams. And I think that he feels that he said all that he has to say, or maybe he just doesn't have anything left in him to give. But he also, I think, wants to leave while he was on top. Because even that last album was a number one album. And he wouldn't want his career to fade by putting out albums that sold less and less and less. It's one way to look at it. And Bill Maher, at the end of this interview, really praised him for that.
Well,
Instead of
but
putting out music, you know, it's kind of interesting. We had Mark Rivera on our show, and I always remember this one thing about when Mark was a guest. And you know that Billy Joel and Elton John toured together for many years. And Elton was asking Billy, when are you going to put out another album again? It's been a long time and everything. I keep putting out music. And Billy Joel said to him, yeah, but who's listening to it? What's memorable, of the more recent stuff of Elton John?
well, that's a
It could be the way that Billy looks at all this. What's the point of continuing to put,
I look at it, well, Billy Joel's an artist, Elton John's an artist, artists and they're musicians, composers, they write music, and that's their life, okay? And they should be doing it for themselves first, and the fans and the money last. That comes great. But they're musicians. Um, and I've always believed, when it comes to like art, you don't lose the ability to do that. Um, I'm going to use Allan as an example. Allan's an author. He's written 2 books on Paul McCartney. Allan doesn't wake up one day and think, no one's going to read volume 3. I'm not going to get as many people buying my third, our. I'm sorry again, Adrian. Adrian, don't. I hope he's not watching. Nobody's going to read volume 3 as much as they did volume 1 and 2. So why bother? Well, that's what you do. You're a writer. And if people choose to ignore, that's their loss. So Billy Joel is going to. I don't buy this. I have nothing left to say. Who's Ringo Starr? Why is Ringo making records? Am I making sense? I'm getting on a
yes,
soapbox now.
it's two different ways of looking at your career.
It's come to the point now where Ringo puts out a record. He knows it's going to sell 25 copies. He doesn't care. He
Hmm.
enjoys making the music for the 25 people who are going to buy the album. And when all is said and done, he's going to have this body of work that someone's going to go, wow, where was I? You know, Elton John happens to have hit a run of quality albums, starting with songs from the West Coast. And these albums that really didn't sell much because they didn't have Disney theme songs in them that turned into mega number one hits. Yet they're the best albums that he had put out. Peachtree Road, The Captain and the Kid, The Diving Board. Hey, outstanding albums. So it doesn't matter who's going to hear it, Billy. You know, if Elton has written an album of songs and 100 people buy it, well, the other couple of million that didn't, they lose because the thing is probably as good as some of the stuff that's come before. I mean, this again.
I
Am I
understand.
making?
I see your point,
I
Darren. And
get rolling sometimes, and I'm like, next thing you know, I'll be complaining about why I can't get good pizza in Westchester County, like when I lived in the Bronx.
well,
But anyway, um, I don't buy that. Like, who's buying? Well, no, not a lot of people buy music anymore. So you stop being an artist?
it's just two different ways of looking at how to handle your career. That's all. When you think about it, isn't it a great feeling to leave when you're on top? If your last album is number one, no, I'm just saying I'm not saying I agree with him, but he doesn't want to be in that category of putting out albums that matter less and less and less as time goes on. Now you could say what you want about Elton John, and I respect your opinion because you know his music really well. There are a lot of people out there who will always say it's not the same as what he did in the early 70s through
Have you?
Captain Fantastic. There's a lot of people out there that say that about him. So I can see both points of view.
Those of you who have Goodbye Yellow Brick Road at home, have you listened to songs from the West Coast? How many bought the album he did with Brandy Carlisle this year? Okay. I can't see it right in you. But anyway, I mean, I just feel like, and like I always, someone like, I mean, there's so many artists that had these runs late in their life, and it's a shame that the quality that they were putting out wasn't heard by more people. McCartney's on that list. I
Yes.
thought Neil Young went on a late period tear of brilliant albums. Some of Lou Reed's best albums were some of the late period ones that he put out that you don't hear people talk about Magic and Loss and New York like they do Transformer. But I mean, still, I mean, late in life, Lou was still, even when he was making controversial records like Lulu with Metallica, I mean, he was breaking ground. He was not standing pat, so it didn't sell a lot. Times change.
Okay, well, this is a very debatable subject here, and we go on all the time about the solo Beatles and how they're viewed by the general public who don't really know a lot of their recent stuff. Look at all this about Ringo. Look at all the quality stuff Ringo's done since Time Takes Time. He's still putting it out, and I admire him. It's like nothing phases him. He's going ahead, he's making another album. It doesn't matter how high his latest album went on the charts. That's great. I
All of
guess
them are better than any Billy Joel album.
I
well,
mean, Billy Joel,
don't go, don't go that
I mean, from Turnstiles to Stranger and 52nd Street are flawless in my book.
Mm.
And the stuff that he did before and after that had definitely have the moments. Um, I'm not by any means knocking what he's put out. But you make comments like that about the White Album. It smells more like something that you sing. We know you're a Beatles fan because of the way
Hmm.
you've you've looked up to the Beatles. You've worked with McCartney. There is clearly a love of the Beatles. Now you're on Bill Maher's show with a new documentary out, and you let's say something a little controversial here and get a headline or two and maybe pick up a few more viewers. That's what it smells like to me.
You know what? I got an email from my friend Matthew DeMarcos, who you guys may remember as the guy who came up with that show that we did about, if you could take one song from an album and put it on the next. It was a
Yeah.
complicated thing. It was fun to do. Anyway, his theory is that Billy Joel is really talking about Abbey Road because there are not many unfinished songs on the White Album, except for like Wild Honey Pie. What would you think is an unfinished song? Why would he say
Well,
that? So he may be thinking of the medley on side two of Abbey Road and just said the White Album. No, but they were talking about double albums, so I don't know.
yeah. I mean, why don't we do it in the road as sort of a fragment? There's so many short songs on there that sometimes you think you've listened to a fragment. I
Yeah.
mean, things pop past you on the White Album so fast, because there's that period where everything's like 2 minutes and less, it seems like. Ping,
Some
ping.
people think "Why Don't We Do It in the Road" wasn't much of a song. Sticking "Can You Take Me Back" at the end of "Cry Baby Cry," stuff like that.
They
But
may
Yeah,
be
but
right.
that
They
doesn't
may be
even
right,
get
but
its
they're the
own track.
Beatles.
So, you know, there's 30 songs on that album,
I know.
and not counting Can You Take Me Back? So 31 if you count that. I don't know. Well, what can
And you know something, this whole business about um, Paul carrying the weight. I understand the argument about like from 67 on or after Brian Epstein died, but it's very balanced on the White Album between John songs and Paul songs. John contributed a ton of stuff on the White Album. So I don't agree with what he's saying there, but
I think the scales are a little tipped towards McCartney with Abbey Road. And maybe you could make the argument that McCartney was really coming into his own, or having a creative burst at a time when maybe John was like, you know what? His heart wasn't maybe in it for a couple of months during that Abbey Road time, which resulted in it being a heavier McCartney record. But that's didn't mean if they didn't break up that in '71 they didn't do an album that's loaded with the tunes we have on Imagine, and it would have been a Beatle album that was skewed towards John.
hmm,
maybe this will mean that we won't have to see Billy Joel turn up at Paul McCartney concerts anymore.
I
It would
think
find his
Paul has
worst
heard
nightmare.
all
Billy Joel and Andrew Lloyd Webber together one night.
kinds of.
God. If I ever find myself at that, I'll know that I died and that's hell.
There's one thing that Bill Maher said in this interview, and he said this before about the reason why the Beatles broke up, in his opinion, is because, oh, he said the Beatles were a singles band. Yeah, they had great singles, but their albums were amazing too.
Yeah.
And towards the end, it was tilted more towards McCartney than Lennon. McCartney got more A-sides than Lennon did. And that's true to some degree, but even in the last few years, John had the Ballad of John and Yoko. He had Come Together. He had All You Need Is Love. It wasn't all McCartney, so I don't agree with that.
I
But
think
I,
it's
I like I like both those gentlemen because they're very outspoken people, and you know exactly how they feel, whether you agree with them or not. Billy Joel is one of my favorite artists of all time, but I like his entire catalog, really, from Piano Man on. I think it's consistently strong. I tend to prefer the earlier stuff. I think Turnstiles is amazing. Still
yeah.
love The Stranger a lot. Piano Man I like a lot. But and he was so influenced by them. Listen to the Nylon Curtain, for God's sakes. There's a lot of, and it's a cool thing. Bill Maher brought up Laura, the song Laura, which I've put in my own radio show because it's so Beatlesque. It's so Lennon-y. And it's so cool that he even mentioned Laura. And Bill Maher really knows his stuff with Billy Joel. He's constantly citing his lyrics. And I think, any Billy Joel fan would probably enjoy this interview because it focuses a lot on Billy Joel's lyrics, which he doesn't get enough credit for, I think. Anyway, more news here. A new documentary on Ed Sullivan called Sunday Show is now available on Netflix. The focus of the documentary is to show how Ed was a trailblazer in putting many black artists on his show for exposure, while being warned by executives and sponsors, especially in the South of the U.S., not to do so. Um, Ed had a lot of clout at that time because the show was so popular. and he pushed the envelope as far as it could go. The show is actually a mixture of performances from people like Stevie Wonder, Nina Simone, and James Brown. Observations are made in this program by Smokey Robinson, Berry Gordy, and Harry Belafonte. It also includes footage from the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and Elvis Presley. Speaking of Elvis Presley, a new box set called Elvis Presley Boulevard is coming out, and it includes a rehearsal take of Elvis doing George Harrison's Something. This is a 5 CD collection spotlighting Elvis's recording sessions and rehearsals at RCA's historic Sunset Boulevard studio. Thanks to Scott O'Rourke for that information. Vince Calabra, sorry, Vince Calandra has died. He stood in for George Harrison when they were rehearsing for the Beatles' debut on The Ed Sullivan Show. Initially, it was Neil Aspinall who stood in for George, but he was called away when he learned that Louise Harrison, George's sister, was being refused entry into the hotel. Calandra said he had an instant rapport with the Beatles. John Lennon asked him if Buddy Holly and the Crickets ever played on the show, and Calandra said, if you move 2 steps to the right, that's where Buddy stood. And he also held cards for the Beatles there. Vince Calandra, God bless him, was 91. Just a couple more things. Pete Best and the Casbah Coffee Club will have streets named in their honor in Liverpool. Pete Best Drive and Casbah Close will be found on a new housing estate to be built on Everton Football Club's former training ground at Belfield in West Derby. The Casbah is said to be just, well, less than half a mile away. See that half a mile away I put in there? The Billy Joel reference. I just worked that in. You heard me, you like the face there, Alan. Uh, you heard me mention about the troubles of Jeff Lynne in concert, missing the last 2 concerts with ELO from his final tour. Doctors saying he has a systemic infection and he's not supposed to perform anymore. Although we've been hearing, and Darren's been telling me that that doesn't mean he's not going to record. But there is an email that was posted online if you would like to send Jeff Lynne your well wishes. And the email is JLELOMAIL at csmmgmt.com. Again, JL for Jeff Lynne, then ELO, then mail at csmmgmt.com. All right. Finally, let's not forget the Fest for Beatle fans is about to happen in Chicago at the Hyatt Regency O'Hare. That's August 8th through the 10th. If you need any information about guests, hotel information, anything you need, go to thefest.com for that. And there you have it.
Thank you, Ken. Um, as always, a great job with the news. And now on to our topic, which is seeing the Beatles live, whether, well, maybe one of us, possibly, I don't think so, though, saw the band together performing live. Or, what were the memorable shows? Um, and we're doing this again as Paul goes into a series of shows later this year, another leg of his Got Back tour in the fall, and Ringo Starr and his All-Star Band with a few weeks of shows coming up. The second leg of his 2025 shows with the All-Star Band. So kind of celebrating the fact that Paul and Ringo spent parts of 2025 touring. Going to talk about our favorite concerts, those memorable moments that have left a mark on us.
That the
So let's
three of us
start
have
with,
actually seen and been at.
oh yeah, shows that we've been at, of course. The ones that touched us, these moments that we got to experience in person. So we'll start off with Ken, and and what were those magical moments for you of catching the Fab Four live?
Well, I've seen 3 of the 4 Beatles live. The only one I've never seen is John. I still feel privileged that I got to see George in '74, although that wouldn't be in my top concerts that I've seen. Definitely my favorite concert of all time by any artist is Wings Over America. And seeing Paul at Madison Square Garden, I think, when I talk about these few shows that I'm about to bring up, one of the big differences about the Wings Over America tour is that it happened at a time when a solo Beatle was selling records and in the millions and was vital and on the radio and constantly being heard. It was a magical time, 1976, not just for Wings at the Speed of Sound, but rock and roll music from the Beatles was on the charts. Got to Get You Into My Life was a hit. Silly Love Songs, Let 'Em In, major hits. Silly Love Songs was the number one song of the year. And Paul put on a tremendous show for all of us who never saw any of the four of them live. Well, I had seen George in '74, but for so many people, it was exciting just because this was his first tour in the US. And to see this band, which I thought really performed well, and we're also dealing with a time unlike today where if I want to find out what Paul just did in concert, I can look it up online. I can go up to the setlist.fm and see his whole set list. Um, People didn't really know or talk to each other about all the songs that artists did in concert. When I went to school, I had friends of mine who liked similar artists, but we weren't studying like we do for this podcast what these artists were doing. So this was all new to me. I didn't know exactly what Paul was going to do. I figured, yeah, he's going to be doing stuff from Wings to the Speed of Sound and probably the last few albums, but it really was a showcase of Wings. And I didn't go there to see a Beatle necessarily as I did to see Wings.
Mhm.
And as we've talked about many times here on this show, especially with Darren, listening to classic rock radio, hearing not just Paul songs, but Denny Lane songs, Jimmy McCulloch songs, those were done in concert. 5 songs were done by Denny Lane with lead vocals in concert in this show. And Jimmy had Medicine Jar. And the performance was fantastic. To start off a concert with Venus and Mars Rock Show Jet, I'll say it again, I've said it many times. There's never been a better opening song or medley of songs that Paul's done in concert other than that. And the songs that he did from the previous albums, from Band on the Run on, worked so well as a live set. Jimmy McCulloch was on fire. I remember just really hearing great lead guitar work on stage. Just to see Paul, strut on stage doing his little dance during Silly Love Songs, which is great to watch. I loved seeing that. And just the whole idea of you're seeing Paul for the first time. He's moving around from bass to piano to acoustic guitar, doing the whole middle set on acoustic guitar, which I thought was a cool idea that he took later on. I love that whole format of the show. And to end the concert with Soily, which I had never heard before. I'm not even sure if it had been bootlegged at all
No.
at that point. And I just remember at the end of the show, when the lights went up, I'm turning to the people around me and I'm saying, "What was that?" And you had all the smoke coming up from the stage, and it takes guts to close a concert with a song that nobody knows. Even if it's not a song in Paul's repertoire, you could do a Chuck Berry song or something classic like that that everyone's heard of. But no, he did a song that he never released. And maybe it's just because of the fact that it was the first, I keep saying the first, it's after George Harrison, but I was so blown away by that whole experience. And because of the fact that Paul was doing so well at the time, it's remained for me my favorite concert ever. And I've seen McCartney many times. I just said recently, probably 30, although I've never done a count of it. And I've loved all the tours and different set lists and everything. But it was a different time back then because Paul wasn't relying on being a Beatle. Whereas now you go and see him and you're going to see a legend, not necessarily for his new album or the last few albums. So it's a whole different experience going back to 1976 for that. And I treasure that moment. I live, I have a lot of musical taste, but I live for the newer stuff a lot. I'm just as excited about a new McCartney album now as I was when Wings the Speed of Sound came out. And so that will always be my number one. My number two, and I know that Allan is going to be similar with Allan because when you've seen an artist that you love in a very small environment in a club, there's nothing like it. And I saw Paul entirely by accident at the Mean Fiddler in London when he
Hmm.
did that. I went to London with a friend of mine, Joe Fernandez. We've been friends since I started doing my Beatles show, and his cousin Nelson. And when I went to England, I wasn't planning on it being necessarily a Beatles trip. But as soon as we landed in London, we heard about this show. We had no idea this was even going to happen. And whatever plans we had for our vacation, this had to come first. Everything else we just threw out the window. So I did everything I could to try to get tickets for it. I knew that Mark Lewison worked at MPL. I tried contacting Mark. He couldn't do anything for me. We ended up buying tickets from scalpers on the street, taking our chances, not even knowing if they were real tickets.
Wow.
And we got in. And this was a small club, and I stood probably about 20 feet away from Paul and the band, a very small stage. The place was packed, and I'm equating this with like being in the cavern. In the early years of the Beatles. And I swear, as I'm sitting here, my feet did not move from the beginning of the show to the end. I had no space to move. I couldn't do anything. I don't know how any elderly people or people, getting older can possibly deal with something like this. Because I don't know if I could stand for 2 feet, for 2 hours straight. After a while, the legs are going to be suffering a little bit. But for 2 hours straight, I got to see Paul do this show. And the first set was all acoustic in preparation for Unplugged. And the second set was all electric. So I got to hear a lot of stuff for the first time, a lot of what he was going to do on Unplugged. And, when you're that close and you're hearing everything, it was just an amazing experience. I felt like fans did seeing the Beatles at the Cavern. And I know Alan saw Paul at the Cavern. That's probably going to be among his few that he's going to mention. But yeah, stuff from Off the Ground he was doing, I think. No, that couldn't have been. He did like My Brave Face, I remember. The whole set list is online. But it was an incredible show. You're just transfixed when you're that close and you're, you know, packed with people everywhere you are. You just can't move. Um, that would have to be my second favorite show. Um, and if I had to pick one from Ringo, I always say that I like the lineup that he had with Sheila E. and Greg Lake and Howard Jones and Roger Hodgson. And I just love that lineup the most because I like the mixture of all the music. It's so eclectic. And I think the band, all the Ringo All-Star bands have been fantastic. I can't take away anything from any one of them. They've all been great. Sometimes it's like, my God, Jack Bruce with Peter Frampton in one tour. The lineups have been so tremendous, but I just like the fact that he went into 80s music there. There was some Supertramp music. Howard Jones was in there. They did In the Court of the Crimson King, and then they did The Glamorous Life from Sheila E. And just that wide spread of music and performed with such perfection, you know, it was like effortless by this band. I love that band so much. And like I said, I love all of them. But I think I saw this lineup at Mohegan Sun. I'm not even sure the venue I saw it, but all of Ringo's tours, in most cases, I see two shows or more. because he always seems to play most of the time pretty close to where I live. So if I can catch him more than once, I'll do it. And in the earlier days, if you went and you saw two shows in a row, there'd be some difference because there'd usually be a solo set where one of the members gets to stand up alone or maybe with one other member and they'll do a song. And then the next day there'll be another member doing a solo song. So there'd always be a difference in the shows when you went back then. Um, so those would probably be it. But, I've been blessed with so many great McCartney shows and so many great Ringo shows. I just, I had the chance to see George in Japan and I didn't do it.
Wow.
Something I regret. Because Charles Rosenay had put together a whole tour package at the time. And it included three shows with George in
Wow.
Japan to see. And I passed on that, figuring I'll see him again. What a fool. How I wish I could take that back and
Good call, Ken.
yeah, hey, we all do things we regret. Um, and I just wish I had the chance to see John just once.
Yeah.
That's my biggest regret because he had the fewest shows, obviously. So if you were there at the one-to-one concert or a live piece or any of those, shorter performances like John Sinclair, you were lucky.
Yeah.
So
The
those are
one
my favorites.
the one show that you didn't pick here as the three, but you said you saw was seeing George in '74 with was it a co-bill with Ravi Shankar that tour technically?
Yes, I think I remember his name being mentioned alongside
What do
George.
you remember? I'm curious about that because that's, of course, a much maligned tour that is sort of become a little bit of a footnote because it's so many years ago. And you hear about how his voice was bad and people were cranky because he shared the bill with Ravi Shankar. What's your memories of the '74? Do you how clear are they also?
Semi-clear. What I've often said is that I like the show. I think the band was tremendous, great musicians, but I couldn't hear George that well. I did hear his voice being somewhat hoarse. I wouldn't say it was terrible, but from where I was sitting, I didn't hear it really clearly. I think, Billy Preston was the life of the party there because he did what he always does. He does
Mhm.
those hits and he dances around the stage and he's quite a showman and he was electrifying. Will It Go Round in Circles and Nothing from Nothing. That was also a hit at that time in 74, late 74. And that was exciting. I think the crowd was subdued for the Ravi Shankar stuff. I think Tom Scott had his instrumental there as well.
So interesting. It was George Harrison and Ravi Shankar, yet George Harrison's portion of the show wasn't all George. I'm not sure I was aware of that. Billy Preston did
It
tunes, and it was like a Bangladesh sort of
very much like that.
interesting. I don't think I knew that. If I did, and it never made an impact with me. Tom Scott did his own. So even then,
One song.
George was wanted to share the spotlight, didn't want soul focus on him.
Yeah, well, if you were to add up all the songs George did with him singing, I wonder if it would even total an hour, to tell you the truth. So, but this was a way of him getting by and being, well, really the main headliner anyway. But because he had never done a full hour and a half to 2 hour show on a tour before. And, when you're not doing that, I mean, with the Beatles, he got to sing lead on one song, usually, although he'd harmonize too. But those were, half-hour shows once they hit it big.
Right.
He wasn't used to carrying an entire show by himself. And when you're not used to doing that, certainly after a certain amount of time, your voice could get weaker and weaker and strain a bit.
Right.
Um, so But that was a difficult year for George because a lot of things were going on in his personal life and he was very busy. And towards the end, everything was kind of rushed with the Dark Horse tour, and the album wasn't even out when he started the tour, which was so ridiculous when you think about it. Um, but I have hopes that the Harrison estate's going to put together some great video of that tour. And if you can pick apart the best performances from each show, and nowadays you can isolate the vocals really well, although those are multi-tracks anyway, you can probably get a fairly decent performance video from that tour, I'm sure. Um, there's probably some shows that overall he didn't sing well at all, but there were moments when he did sound fine. And I've heard bootlegs where his vocals were okay,
Mhm.
not great, but certainly strong enough to carry the songs and to release that way.
Mhm.
So I hope something will be done, that there'll be an actual,
Right.
commercial release of that. And the band was the real star because they were all great musicians,
Mhm.
all of them.
All right.
What was that? The Tom Scott song was Soundstage of the Mind, I think it was called. But it's also George's nature to share the spotlight with other people. He was never comfortable being, you know, the number one guy, in the band. In a lot of ways, it's a fascinating thing when you talk about the Beatles because you hear how George was so frustrated being in the shadow of John and Paul, but he didn't want to be John or Paul. He wanted to be recognized and he wanted, something like a Traveling Wilburys setup was more his what he would have preferred,
Right.
I think. Um, to be recognized and to be respected and to, be given some of the spotlight was more what he preferred to do. And then later on, as he was getting better and better at songwriting, he really should have gotten a few more songs on Beatles albums, I think.
The Wilburys would have been a great tour if they had gone out. I mean, that would have been
Hmm.
something to see.
Oh yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, and it wouldn't have taken much rehearsal with that band, especially with Roy in it too. Whew, that would have been great.
All right, Alan. Now it's your turn. Take
Okay.
care of those
So
concert memories.
I should say, before we haven't said to the folks out there that the sort of idea that we had was to pick three shows, right? So that's why Ken picked three because
Okay.
Hmm.
I think if we had said five, Ken would easily have come up with two more.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, just wanted to clarify that. Um, so let's see, my three shows. This is really actually hard to do because I've been really lucky in seeing. I never saw John, and I never saw the Beatles as a group. But with the other three, I've been actually pretty lucky. Um, Largely to some degree, for later years because of writing for the Times. You can almost get into anything.
Hmm.
Um, and I used to joke that you call up a record company when you work for the Times and you say, do you think I could get a copy of this disc I'm thinking of reviewing? But what they hear on the other end of the line is, if you don't have your full catalog on my desk by 3 o'clock, I'll be forced to destroy this planet. So anyway, that's makes life simple.
Hmm.
So, but the first one on my list, I was not at the Times yet. I was like 16, and that was the concert for Bangladesh. And what tickets were like maybe 650,
But it
and
was a lot for you.
yeah, for a 16 year
Time,
old.
right?
Yeah,
Hmm.
and I had a friend who um liked I don't know if he liked it, but he routinely went down and stood online for like a day or two to get any important tickets, the Stones or you name it. And so he was great at that and got us t tickets. Like, me and all my pals, were sitting there together and uh, watching this show. And it was just my feeling at the time, to be honest, was I felt that as a concert, it wasn't as good as the Stones in 1969. Um, but in terms of sheer star power and glamour and, all the people on the stage, I mean, everyone's seen the movie and heard the album, everyone knows who was there. And it really was incredible. And like basically all the shows that I'm going to mention, I accidentally taped it. So I was able to sort of live with it until the album came out, over and over. And, some great performances of Waiting on You All, Wah Wah, Wah Wah, I thought was a really good opener.
Hmm.
Um, with the Ravi Shankar set, which I found kind of interesting, but I didn't know very much about Indian music yet. But I could tell that they were tuning and was really kind of surprised when everybody applauded after the tuning. So, when Ravi Shankar said, "Well, I'm glad you appreciate the tuning. I hope you like the performance." That sort of, I thought, okay, yeah, I thought that was tuning, but who knew? Um, so yeah, that was Dylan, I mean, and those were the days. I don't know if you remember, but anytime the band came to town or something like this, everybody would be saying, Dylan's going to show, and Dylan hardly ever showed. In fact, he never showed, but he showed for this, you know. And we had also heard, all through the day that, not only is Dylan going to show, but Ringo's already there, and George, of course, and John and Paul are going to be there too, and it's going to be a complete Beatles reunion, and Dylan,
Hmm.
So the fact that I had like 102 fever, I think I've told this story. Um, I'd been sick like all week. And my parents really wanted me to not go to this concert because they thought I should be staying in bed. And they got a doctor. Remember the days when doctors made house calls?
Hmm.
No.
I mean, it's incredible. The doctor came by and, sort of examined me, and my temperature was still high. And he said, "Look, I would say okay if it was like a basketball game or something important." And I said, "Are you kidding? It's going to be a complete Beatles reunion, and Dylan, I have to go.
And
That's
they might play basketball.
yeah." And when I got home, I didn't have a fever anymore.
No.
So, the curative power of the Beatles. What can I tell you? Um, so yeah, so that was the first one, and that.
Alan,
Mm,
I just wanted to ask you, I know that you're a big Bob Dylan fan.
mm,
That much of a fan at that point?
yeah, yeah. Back then, I Dylan and the Beatles, and the Stones. There was like, and maybe, Cream and Hendrix, like that was my pantheon, So,
So
yeah.
this is 70. This was 71, and how many years had it been that Bob hadn't performed?
Um, well, he did perform in 69 at Isle of Wight, but that was sort of
Right.
like a one-off. Um, and before that, he probably hadn't done anything since 66 because he had the motorcycle accident and then stopped. So except for 69 Isle of Wight, I don't think there would have been any opportunity to see him. And and this was great because he came out and sang like five songs, and singing with George. That was pretty hot. And so despite what I felt at the time about thinking the Stones was a better concert, looking back at it now, I think I would probably revise that opinion, you know. I guess what I felt was that, given how quickly this thing came together and, how relatively little time for rehearsal, it felt, not ragged exactly, but it didn't feel as polished as the Stones did. Uh, but then, looking at what's transpired since then, when I saw the Stones in 72, they were immensely more polished than they were in 69. So, I guess I'm that's part of the revision. But I mean, I think back now at Concert for Bangladesh, and there were so many great performances in that set, and seeing two of the Beatles, which I had never seen any of before. And when John did the one-to-one concert, I was already at school. When Paul came with Wings, I was on my way to a classical guitar master class in Spain, so I wasn't even here for that. Um, and yeah, so that stood alone for a very long time. The
Well, just
Bangladesh.
because even though you were at school during one-to-one, you still could have gone.
Well, I could have gone, but it's sort of like I just got to school. I mean, I went to school in Syracuse, which was like
Oh,
4 hours away, and um, it wasn't. And I didn't drive yet,
okay.
so yeah, that wasn't gonna, just wasn't gonna happen. But oh well, what can you do?
Do you remember this idea of possibly John and Paul being at the concert for Bangladesh? Was that mentioned a lot on the radio, or is that just among fans and them talking?
I have a feeling that WNEW might have mentioned it, although they would have mentioned during the day that they weren't at the afternoon show. I went to the evening show.
Hmm.
So, but the fact that they weren't at the afternoon show didn't, to us, mean that they weren't going to be at the evening show because, you know, anyway, it should have meant it probably because you don't
Hmm.
just pull out all the stops like that without at least having one previous performance. But yeah, but
Was
that's
it
what we thought.
common?
Hmm?
Was it common back then for there to be two shows in one day, or was that unique
I don't think it
for the
was unique.
Bangladesh concert?
I don't think it was unique. I mean, we used to spend a lot of our time at the Fillmore, and they had two shows a night, like an 8 o'clock show and an 11:30 show. So two shows didn't seem that odd.
But to have a matinee, clear out the arena, and
Yeah,
have an evening show, that happened from time to time back then?
Stones did it in 69 as well. Uh,
Huh.
in 69, I went to the afternoon show. In fact, on Get Your Yayas Out, when he
Yeah.
says, "Welcome to the breakfast show," that's the show I was at.
Hmm.
Wow.
Wasn't really breakfast. Well, maybe for him. But
Was it difficult getting tickets for Bangladesh?
I don't think so, but I wasn't the one who stood online. It was my friend that I had mentioned, and I think he camped out for a day or two
Hmm.
outside Madison Square Garden. Back then there wasn't like, Ticketmaster and the whole thing that there is now. It was you stood online, you got tickets, and they didn't even generally have ticket limits in those days. I mean, he got tickets for at least three or four of us. So,
There was also, you didn't really have a choice on where you were sitting back then, did you?
I don't think so.
You picked your ticket level maybe,
Right.
and then you
You
could be
got the
sitting
best
here.
that you could get. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, because that was like, yeah, that was sort of the beginning of my concert going, where you bought what you got. Wait a
Yeah.
minute, no, you got what you bought. You got what you didn't. You couldn't cherry pick sections and rows and
Yeah. We were on the side, a couple of sections up. I don't know how to describe it otherwise, but it
yeah,
was like an oval, the stage was in front, and we were like here.
yeah.
You know, it was pretty good. I mean, we weren't like that distant. It seemed you could see everything, and yeah. So the other funny thing about it is, okay, so it was, there's this promo guy, Pete Bennett. You probably all know the
Mhm.
name. Pete Bennett used to work, actually, he worked for Allan Klein, um, but he promoted a lot of Capitol stuff. In fact, we thought at the time he worked for Capitol. I'm not sure now. I think he worked for Klein, you know. But in any case, I lived in Yonkers, which was like town just north of New York, on next town up. Uh, and he wrote a column for the Yonkers newspaper every Friday. And my friends and I used to make fun of it, because all it was, my good friend John Lennon was, here and he was going to do this. And then my good friend Mark Farner, whatever, and we thought he was sort of a joke, but we're sitting there watching this concert and Dylan comes out. And what you hear on my tape is all of us saying, "It's the Pete," because Pete walked out with Dylan. It's Dylan, and it's the Pete. We used to call him the Pete because
The Pete.
the Pete because he had that kind of accent. Um, yeah, yeah. So get your hands on that tape. That is a rarity. So, should I go on to the next one?
Yes,
Sure.
it'd be nice.
Okay. Um, So chronologically, the next one would be Paul at the Ed Sullivan Theater on December 10th, 1992 for Up Close. Um, as Ken had
Wow.
mentioned, and I've mentioned several times on this show, I think that, my favorite McCartney shows have been things like this: small theater, no special staging, no screens, no like super rehearsed in between songs patter, just a small, intimate kind of performance. And I've been lucky enough to see a lot of them. I went to a Buddy Holly Week performance in 1990 at the Lone Star Roadhouse and stood and sat at a table like right in front of the stage. And while the performance wasn't mostly Paul came up and took a mic and sang a few Buddy Holly songs with the band, with the Crickets, I think was they were playing. And a bunch of other people. So that was kind of cool. But it was only a few songs, so I couldn't really pick that one as the one. I did go to the Cavern, but I like this Ed Sullivan Theater performance a lot better than the Cavern. Partly because the Cavern was like really crowded, like Ken's show where you couldn't move. That was what that was like. And it also, like, they didn't have a raked floor or anything and no seats. So you're standing there and like everybody on the planet is taller than I am, and I'm sort of relatively towards the back. So I had a real hard time seeing. Um, but you could hear it and it was great. And it was a lot of fun.
That was when David Gilmour and
Yeah.
and Ian Pace was on drums and
Yeah. Yeah, that was a good show. And, but also the other thing is that, like, I was working, like I was reviewing that show. So I had to sort of, listen in that kind of way. And, listening to review something is really different from listening just as a spectator. You're constantly thinking of like what it is that they're doing and how you would describe it, and you're taking notes and all that. And you don't have to do that when you're just a spectator. I mean, even with classical things, I'd go to a concert that I wasn't reviewing, and I'd just reflexively take out my pen and say, I don't have to do this, and put it back in my pocket. Um, so Ed Sullivan Theater, I wasn't reviewing, I was just there. And it was, first of all, let's face it, the Ed Sullivan stage, I mean, that in itself is kind of cool, like the Cavern, except that this actually was the Ed Sullivan Theater, and the cavern is a replica,
Right.
you know, not really the cavern. So yeah, and they start with 20 Flight Rock. He's got off the ground coming out, so get out of my way, fixing a hole, which I don't think I had heard him play live before. Penny Lane, hadn't heard him play live before. I want to be your man, and it just seemed like a really cool show of a band running through these new and old songs and Beatles songs with an actual Beatles singing them who I hadn't heard do it live before. I'd seen him in '89 at the Garden. And that was, I'd seen him at the Garden a few times. I saw him at Yankee Stadium, which was great because it was Yankee Stadium, and the Beatles are, of course, the Yankees of rock bands. The only problem with that concert is, I think for an encore, Billy Joel came out and played, and it's like, oh, come on, Paul.
That's what you get.
Yeah. So, but yeah, that was fun too. But still, this was really special, and the fact that there were no moving lights overhead, no screens, no nothing, just the guys on stage playing. I really enjoyed that. There's something like really intimate about these small shows, and also the introductions to the songs are sort of like he's talking to the crowd right in front of him that he can see. He may very well have rehearsed those lines like he does for the big shows, but it didn't seem like it. It seemed more off the cuff. So that's my second one.
He
Uh,
also did that really weird version of not weird, but like hillbilly version of Can't Buy Me Love.
right, right, and he very rarely does them differently than the record. I mean, he's done it a couple of times, but that was a surprise. And then of course we got to see that from that performance and the next night's performance on TV eventually, and also I think the full shows were bootlegged.
Hmm.
So that was kind of cool. Um, yeah. uh, so the third one would be a Ringo show, and similarly, I've seen the all-star bands, many of the all-star bands in big theaters in Radio City, at the Beacon, Holmdel, New Jersey, various places. They're always a good time. Ken has sort of described that pretty well. So, but he also played twice at the Bottom Line, and I went to both of those. And I guess I'm gonna choose the 2003 show. I'm not sure if Darren was gonna choose one of those, but anyway, this was in March 2003, and he was promoting Ringo Rama. And I think the day after the show, my review of Ringo Rama was coming out in the Sunday Times, but the Sunday Times is printed on like Tuesday, and you can get it Wednesday if you're in the record business or so. So David Fishoff, whose idea the All Star Band was, and who was at the time still doing the All Star Band, was at the show, and he came up to my table at the Bottom Line, and he said, so, saw your review. And one of the things that I'd said in the review is like, this is a really good band. And I'd seen him play with a small band of not known people in '98 at the Bottom Line. And I said, he ought to go on tour with these guys. The All Stars is great, but this is kind of a cool little band, and it would be really fun if he toured with them. And so David Fishoff came up and he said, yeah, so I saw your review, and I said to Ringo, so, Allan Kozinn thinks you should tour with these guys. And he said, tell him to forget it. So the show starts off with me getting a message indirectly from Ringo, so that was kind of cool. He did "It Don't Come Easy," "Memphis in My Mind," "Photograph," "Want to Be Your Man," "Boys," um, "Never Without You," "Yellow Submarine." Nora Jones came out, and they did "A Little Help from My Friends." The group was Ringo, Mark Hudson, Steve Dudas, Gary Barr, the guys who were playing on the albums, a couple of whom I think have been on the show,
Hmm.
this show. Matt Bissonette and Greg Bissonette, Matt on bass, Greg on drums. And, again, the bottom line, very sort of intimate show,
Yeah.
like with McCartney and the Ed Sullivan Theater, and it just feels like not overproduced and not, you know, terribly thought through how it's going to be staged, any of that stuff. Just come out, play a bunch of the tracks, and that was a lot of fun. So both of those bottom line concerts were great. And of course, anyone who spent any time at the bottom line probably still laments the fact that it no longer
Yeah.
exists.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Absolutely.
So a lot of great shows there.
Having seen this band and also having seen the All-Star Band, you prefer he do something more like a Roundheads or this kind of format?
I like them both. I thought, maybe he could alternate or something. I just felt that it would be cool if he would tour with the guys who he's making the records with. You
Right.
Um, but yeah, it was a tight group, and it was really good. I can't say the performances were better or worse than the All-Star Band performances, but the show was, more intimate, and the circumstances, the surroundings were, smaller, and so it just had a very sort of off the cuff feel, and I like that kind of thing, obviously.
It's also nice when every song that's being performed, Ringo sings.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sharing.
These were short shows. So, but
Yeah.
yeah,
They're like 70 minutes, right? Something like that.
something like that. Yeah. They're both out on bootleg,
Yeah.
one of which may be my tape.
So that's those are your picks.
Yep.
Now, I've actually, if I look a little confused, it's because I suddenly had a bit of a brain fart when you're picking Ringo at the bottom line. How many times would you say over the years did Ringo play the bottom line?
Twice.
Okay. Because I was doubting myself here while you're talking. I saw Ringo at the bottom line in 1998.
Right. May
Okay.
12th.
Okay. Good. All right. Then maybe I'm not as cl yeah. I got a little
But then I'm
confused.
glad I
So
picked the other one because
and I think what was throwing me is like, did I know about the second show? Please don't tell me my mind is that gone that maybe I was even there.
it's
Because
possible.
one of the shows I was going to pick, there was an A and B. I had to do an A B on one of them, and I'll start with the Ringo now because there were two shows that I got to see Ringo where he headlined his own show with the Roundheads,
Hmm.
and the first time was at the bottom line, and what I remember about that was that the album that he was promoting was Vertical Man.
Mhm.
Right. And it was out of that, I guess, that series of promotional appearances that the VH1 Storytellers performance came out of in the live album.
Right.
So seeing Ringo and the Roundheads at the bottom line, I had forgotten the date, but while you were talking, Alan, I pulled it up here, May 12th, 1998. And then I'm thinking, wait a minute, did I see him maybe the second time, the one that Alan's talking about? And if not, where was I?
But I'm
So
glad you're picking
and
this
that was
one because you had mentioned that you were thinking of doing one of them, and I thought, okay, there's like a 50-50 chance I'm gonna like pick
Yeah,
the
I'm
same
like
one.
wondering now why, unless there was a reason why I missed it or couldn't make it and was upset and put it out of my mind that I missed
Hmm.
this. But I was going to pick that one, and I was also thinking I did get the chance to see Ringo. It was on a Sunday at Irving Plaza.
I was at that.
that one, and that was when
Choose Love was out.
Choose Love was right. And out of that, I think there was a couple of shows he did came his appearance on Soundstage, which was the Live at Soundstage album. Um, so that I'm gonna tack that one on now that I've mentioned it, but to my one of my three, we're seeing those two kind of like not private, but small, intimate performances by Ringo and the Roundheads. Irving Plaza, a bigger venue than the Bottom Line, but I knew Alan Pepper at the Bottom Line very well, and WFUV worked very closely with the Bottom Line through the years. And Alan I remember, was very kind in making sure that I was at that show in '98. Um, and I kind of remember being off to the side, close to the stage, but off to the side. Um, but that was fun, and seeing the Irving Plaza show, because they were different than the All-Star Band shows. I mean, initially my first listing of favorite shows was going the route of firsts. The first time I saw Ringo live was my first time ever seeing a Beatle.
Hmm.
And that was the first All-Star Band tour at Jones Beach Theater. But I don't really remember that actual concert that clearly. I remember a little more about seeing Ringo and the Roundheads in the smaller venues years later. Um, so my first pick would be, I'll stick with let's just say the first Bottom Line show, May 1998, in New York City. Ringo and the Roundheads, promoting Vertical Man. And next for me would be um, seeing Paul perform at the Highline Ballroom. I didn't have the opportunities to see some of these other shows that went earlier, that came before, but the Highline Ballroom I sure did. And having seen him at the Highline Ballroom made me slightly less of a maniac when I missed him recently at where was he? Bowery Ballroom. Right, that's where he played. Earlier in the year, Bowery Ballroom.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So the McCartney show at Highline Ballroom, I think the Highline was a fairly new venue, or at least it had just been named Highline Ballroom and maybe reopened. Um, and Paul was promoting Memory Almost Full,
Right.
and there was a magic in the air for me to be at that, because that was the first and only, as it turns out, time I got to see Paul in a small venue at a show that was largely an industry show. Um, and
I went to that too, and at one point he said, I know some guys are out there taping it, and I'm like,
I remember that was one of those stand for lengthy period of time, and my standing skills were better than they are now, but that was a difficult show to kind of walk back to the garage after the show was over. So that would be another one of mine. And I gotta go with St. Paul at City Field. Um, a hair over seeing Paul live for the first time. The first time I ever saw him was in December '89, the Flowers in the Dirt tour, the first of the four shows at Madison Square Garden, which I was at all four of them. And
Mm.
I was reminiscing about that week when I was thinking about the shows I wanted to talk about here, because Friday nights at that time in 1989, I was on the air on FUV at 11 p.m. Although I'm wondering if the time shift had started yet, where they moved the beginning of the freeform overnights to midnight, because I had it all planned out. I saw the fourth and final McCartney show. I was parked on the west side. I had my McCartney records in the trunk, shot up the West Side Highway, went on the air at WFUV, and maybe I'm sure the show started at midnight at that time. that I was able to make it up there in time to do a wrap, probably all McCartney, three, whatever, how many hours, I don't even remember, coming out of those four shows at the Garden. But got to go to Citi Field because it was, I had missed McCartney appearing at Shea the year before, which was appearing with Billy Joel. That name comes up again, Alan.
Uh-huh.
Uh, but the whole connection between Paul and the Beatles and Shea Stadium, being a Mets fan, missing the show would be in 2008, Billy Joel and um, and McCartney showing up. Um, I bought tickets to all of the Citi Field shows, three of them, I seem to think it was. And the first night, being down on the floor, dead center, um, in the outfield at Citi Field, the new home of my New York Mets, and there's Paul McCartney, and knowing that I was going to be back for like the other shows, and that was a very magical. That was the one I remember, and what I remember about that show was how good he sounded because I had already started to become aware of the wear on his voice. And it almost was if he found a fountain of youth at those Citi Field shows. Um, so those were my three. And another memory that I have of the Citi Field shows, I think the second night I was down on the field, but over on the side. They weren't as great, the seats. I hate being on sides at concerts. But I'm on the side, and I believe I was with my wife for that show. And I think the show had started. I think Paul was on stage, and who should walk? This would be, I probably was sitting around the third base foul line in the outfield. So who should be walking in front of me? I was in the front row of this kind of section that was on an angle, but the owners of the New York Mets, Fred and Jeff Wilpon, who I let walk past me before I shouted out loud, "Sell the team!" And for some reason, I think I caught like in between. It was you ever talking, all of a sudden it seems like the room's quiets down and you're the only, and everyone hears you. It seemed like it echoed through the stadium, and they stopped dead in their tracks and turned around and shot me a look. And for a split second, I got like, I'm going to get thrown out of the McCartney concert. But walked away. I don't think my wife talked to me again the rest of the night, because it was that attention getting and that loud. But I think that was the second of the. I want to say he played three nights at Citi Field, but it could have been four.
Don't
Or
remember.
am I getting it mixed up with 89?
89 was 4.
89 at the Garden in December was four. And I
Yeah,
remember it being a Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday.
right.
And that was the one of the only times, and probably definitely the first time I stayed up. I was out all night long online for tickets in 89. And they kept adding shows. And we just happened to be, it was so easy then. And I guess it was Ticketron, they'd add another show. Well, you just happen to be still wandering outside the store, and you'd run right back in to buy tickets for the additional night. Where'd I get the money? Come to think of it, to keep peeling off money to get tickets to another, and I'd come home with tickets to four shows. I don't remember, but so those are my three. And Ringo at the bottom line in 89, 98 rather, 98, and Paul at the Highline Ballroom in 07, and 2 years after that at Citi Field, opening up Citi Field in the first year of the stadium was in existence. Those were my three. And the honorable mentions would be Ringo at Irving Plaza, and the very first time I saw Paul at the Garden, early December '89. Um, So Wings, I remember when the Wings played and they were at the Garden. I've told my kids this for a guy that's been to hundreds of concerts. When I was 11, which is how old I was when Wings played in 76, um, things like Madison Square Garden in Manhattan could very well have been Saturn to me. The concept of traveling through space to this other world to see a live concert it was just it didn't resonate in my small little sheltered world. But I remember the 11 o'clock news covering, like wrapping up the broadcast with the former Beatle performed at the Garden. But I was like, oh, I wish I could have gone.
You know, when you're a little kid, and I lived on Long Island most of my life before I moved to Connecticut. When you're a kid, New York City is the biggest thing in the world. It's like a whole other universe.
Yeah.
It's a special event to go into Manhattan. You know, when I was a kid, going to Radio City Music Hall was an event, you know?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. It was like this. How would you even go about, I mean, the tick I don't have no memory of announcements of there had to have been on the radio of tickets going on sale, Wings over America, and I don't have any memory of it because that was like I didn't that wasn't my world going out of my little cocoon to concerts and on other planets.
Hmm.
um I would love to have, obviously, but so my next best thing was then the first show, which was the first of four nights in December '89 at the Garden, the Flowers in the Dirt tour. And you know how many of those programs, those free, I loved those free, I was taking them off seats before the show even started. Um, and I got a whole box load of them, and I go on eBay and I'm like, really? $2? Come on. I got a box load of them.
You know what's bugging me is that you guys have been to shows that I've been to before I knew you. So I would never have known that you were there because I was in the Ed Sullivan Theater also. I
Right.
was at both shows for
Yeah.
up close. That was a big fluke that I
And
got
I
to go.
was at the same 1980 for the first 1989 McCartney concert at the Garden that Darren was at. And you
Yeah.
must have been at that too.
I was at three of the four shows that week. The only show I missed was the one where he did Jingle Bells.
That was on the 15th, the Friday.
Okay.
Wow. See, I don't remember that, but I was there. Right, this is in '89 you're talking, right?
Yeah.
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 This is why my father used to say, "You really are a cesspool of useless knowledge."
Oh, that was nice though.
Mm.
My father once told my friends, my dad had to use my car for something. No, I had to borrow his car. So we had to switch cars one day. And he got in mine. I think he went down the block and it overheated immediately, literally, like, and I get home from, my dad drove a station wagon briefly. We called it the Yellow Submarine because it was yellow. And I needed to borrow the car because it had the roof rack. Because a friend of mine wanted to get a real Christmas tree and couldn't logistically do it. So it was like I borrowed my father's station wagon. We got the tree, got it up to his apartment, came back home to my house to get switch cars back to get my car back, and I see my father in front of my building with the hood's up, smoke's pouring out of my car engine. And my father's like, "Did you ever think to look in the radiator to see if there's any water in there?" And he looks at my friends. He goes, "He's got all of that rock shit in his head. That's all that's in his head is the rock shit." And that stood then for years. My friends would say to me, "Hey, you got that rock shit in your head. That's all, the concept of maintaining an automobile doesn't, you know."
See, and that's why we're paid the medium bucks.
Yeah. Right.
You know, from now on, anytime some fans of ours meet us in person, they're going to bring up that line to you all the time now.
Yeah. Darren with his rock shit in his head. Um, But anyway, yeah. So yeah, that those were our special mo concert memories of seeing the Beatles. Well, in this case, all individually. Um, as we now go into the approach the fall with Ringo and his all-star band doing a couple of weeks of shows, and Paul out later on um, doing some shows as well, which Ken isn't going as of now to any of the. Are you going to one of the McCartney shows?
Not yet.
But it could still turn.
We'll still be.
Allan's not going.
Nope.
I'm not going, unfortunately. Um, but I will have, I guess, to do a show later in the year when Ken finally does find his ticket to some venue. Um, and we'll see what 2025 was like. But there's our favorite concert memories, and if you want to share yours, you could do so in the comments. And I guess that basically does it for this things we said today. So let's go around the horn and get the latest on what Ken Allen and myself are up to. Ken, you first.
Okay. First of all, on the other podcast show that I'm with Darren, Talk More Talk, a solo Beatles video cast. We just finished a show discussing Paul McCartney's duets in his solo career. This is in celebration of the recent release of My Valentine, Paul recording that with Barbra Streisand. So that is on our YouTube channel. Again, Talk More Talk, a solo Beatles video cast, and all the audio platforms as well. Same ones that we're on things we said today. And so be sure to check that out. There'll be another new show coming, I think a couple of weeks from now. Actually, no. So we're recording this on Tuesday. It'll be sometime next week. Okay, so look out for that. On my own YouTube channel, Ken Michaels Radio, I just did two interviews. One was with Tony Kishman, who plays Paul McCartney in a band called Live and Let Die, the music of Paul McCartney. This band has been around for several years. You might know John Murjavi is in many of the shows. John plays the George guy in Liverpool, the house band at the Fest for Beatle fans, and he's also a part of the Weaklings. I just saw this band in concert. They just did a free show in West Haven, Connecticut. They sound fantastic. Tony, his voice is in great shape. It's a combination of many of the songs that Paul does in concert with some songs he's never done in concert. Like he does Uncle Albert Admiral Halsey. Some shows he does No More Lonely Nights. It's a really tight band, and sometimes this band does special shows with an orchestra too. So they're constantly playing somewhere. Make sure you check them out online. There's an entire 90-minute concert with them if you want to see it. And Tony can look like Paul, although he has to wear a wig for it. But he's got his motions on stage really well, and the band is really great. So I did an interview with him, and I should mention that Tony started out being one of the Pauls in Beatlemania, along with Mitch Weissman. They had several of each member of the Beatles because they would tour in different parts of the country. But he was one of the original Pauls from Beatlemania, and he's been playing Paul either in Beatle bands or in McCartney bands ever since. So if you want to see that interview, find out about this band, his whole history playing Paul, that's on Ken Michaels Radio. And I also just did an interview with Tom Brennan, who has been on my channel a few times, and he does a lot of work that's connected with Badfinger. A lot of the releases that have come out on Y&T Records, the demos that have come out on Pete Ham and Tom Evans and the Ivies. Tom has done work on them, curating the track listing. He talks about the latest one, which is called Pete Ham Acoustic. It's 30 tracks altogether of songs that, for the most part, were not released by Badfinger. Four of them were, and it's all Pete on acoustic guitar and a lot of songs that you probably never heard about, some songs that weren't finished, some that were close to being finished, but many of them you'll listen to and you'll say, why didn't Badfinger release these or work on these? A lot of it's because some of the songs were before they even had a contract. So, but you got you get to see how prolific Pete Ham was all this time because there's so many songs that he wrote that never saw the light of day on Badfinger releases. So that's on my channel, Ken Michaels Radio, my interview with Tom Brennan. My syndicated Beatles show called Every Little Thing is on about 50 radio stations. But the easiest way to listen to it is on WFDU's website. Losing my voice here, sorry. Um, you can catch archival shows of Every Little Thing at WFDU.FM. Go to the archivals page, type in Every Little Thing. They have 2 weeks worth of my shows. So they're the two most recent ones that aired on the radio station. And you can also listen to my show, Every Little Thing, on WFDU as a live broadcast, Saturday mornings at 6 a.m., Sundays at 8 a.m., both Eastern Standard Time. And as far as my website, kenmichaelsradio.com, there's always Beatles trivia there. Every couple of weeks, and you can win your choice of one of 10 prizes, like the McCartney Legacy Volume 2, for example, or the Beatles in India documentary that we had a whole show on with one of the directors right here on Things We Said Today. Um, so many great prizes you can win on my website. Go to the Beatles Trivia and Games page on kenmichaelsradio.com, and that should cover everything.
All right. Thank you, Ken. Alan?
Yeah, at the moment, I'm mainly sort of, in prep for volume three, sort of reorganizing the digital McCartney archive. So I've got this 23 terabyte hard drive and, just going through it and making sure that all the audio and video are, filed properly, labeled properly, getting rid of dupes, try and save some space. Um, so yeah, stuff like that, and it's fun revisiting a lot of these things too. I mean, even stuff that really was for volumes one and two because they're on the same drive. So sort of seeing them again is a lot of fun. But anyway, so that's what I'm doing, and I might as well give you the contact information for all of us, which is if you want to email us, things we said today radio show at gmail.com. Things we said today radio show, all one word, at gmail.com. We're on Twitter at Things We Said Fab, and we're on BlueSky as Things We Said Today, and on Facebook, Things We Said Today video podcast. We hope you're watching the shows on YouTube, but if you just want the audio ones, we're on Podbeam, and Podbeam distributes to Apple and iHeartMusic and tons of other places. So we're everywhere. You can't miss us. Do subscribe to some of these things too, though, especially the YouTube one. It means a lot to us if you subscribe, and yeah, you should. So I think that's it for me.
Right.
Yeah, you can reach me also at on Facebook or as either Allan Kozinn or Allan Kozinn Remixed. And of course, there's the group page, Things We Said Today video podcast, which I mentioned. And that's it.
All right. And as for me, WFUV radio is the place where you can catch me Monday through Thursday nights, starting at 10 p.m. until 2 a.m. Although we're recording this on Tuesday, the 29th of July. So probably I'm off today and tomorrow, so that doesn't really matter. So when you see this, I'll be back on the air. 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. Monday through Thursday nights, and Saturday afternoons from 1 until 4. WFUV is at 90.7 FM in New York City. We cover the entire tri-state area. If you are outside and you want to check us out, you can listen to WFUV.org. Can get our app as well. It's another way to listen and check out WFUV. And think about becoming a supporter. Think about becoming a member because we are member-supported public media. And it's our listeners who power us. So WFUV.org is the website for that. And that basically does it. Does it for me. I know it does it for Ken Michaels and Allan Kozinn. And we will be back at you hopefully in a couple of weeks with a new show here on Things We Said Today. Later.
Peace and love.